Sure. So I have started out as an IP lawyer. That was back in Brazil, where this funny accent comes from. But I was very curious, and rather than taking the most common paths, I've always been attracted to things that are different, things that are just emerging, and things that we don't quite have the answers for. And back then, almost 20 years ago, that was when Napster was created and was already challenging IP law. And back then, Metallica was actually the first band to be suing Napster. I found that to be quite fascinating because there was a big movement around making information free, and that was the whole hacker revolution. And Napster was the first solid, real product to ignite that. So I went on and I did a whole research about that. My dissertation was based on that. I got 100% mark, which opened many doors. Most of them for me to pursue a master's on IP, which I did not want. I had enough of a short career as a lawyer. But because of my research, I was also offered a master's degree in cognitive science to learn how the mind works, which is something that has always fascinated me. And on that piece, I was also trying to understand what is the hacker mindset, so it can be better interpreted in the context of a courtroom. So that took me to Israel. And in Israel, they have one of the top 5 brain research institutes. And that's where I went. To do this master's, but I only spent about 4 or 5 months there because on a given day, a friend of a friend of a friend, he had to introduce me to someone who was the test pilot of this drone manufacturing company. And they had just won a contract with Angola. And as you may know, in Angola, they speak Portuguese. So they needed someone who could speak Portuguese, a little bit of Spanish, because the pilot was an Argentinian guy, English, a little bit of Hebrew, and had a background in IP. I was probably the only one with those skills in the area. So they offered me a lot of money, and I decided to defer the degree. As it turned out, I spent 2 years, 7 levels underground in this maximum security military compound. 5 inverted buildings, and I was on level 6, I think, in one of those buildings, and it was fascinating. I spent 2 years there basically as a business consultant, but I was exposed to the whole technology, the whole process of innovation, and was very much fascinated about that. And like it or not, every single innovation, from the ball pen to the wristwatch to drones and you name it, they will come from the battlefield. So that's where need screams the loudest. And that's when solutions are also presented in a very interesting, innovative way. I finished my contract with them, but during that time, I also met my wife, who was doing something completely different from me. We fell in love, we got married, and her family happened to be living in Australia at the time. So yes, they convinced us to move here. But I didn't want to land on a parachute or anything like that. I wanted to have a job. I wanted to have something solid waiting for me. And I was looking for opportunities, and I found one with the Spotlight Retail Group on a business improvement capacity, which meant that I was going to join a leadership team responsible for learning everything about the business as it was, improving it, and then creating the conditions to expand the company overseas. They wanted to move to Europe, and I was eventually going to be joining the team and leading that international expansion. As it turned out, that never happened because the global financial crisis had finally hit Australia. Australia was the last country to be affected and the first one to get out of it, but it did impact. And I think it was in a period of 2 or 3 days that Spotlight had lost, I don't know, $70-80 million just because of currency fluctuation. And because of all that, all of the expansion plans were put on hold. My role, I was lucky enough to not have lost it, but it became super boring. It became a lot much narrower than what it was. So I didn't have much more holding me there. I wasn't that interested. However, during that time, and that was like a massive restructure, this 3-year period for the business, they had to do a brand refresh. And because of the nature of my job, they said, you go and you lead this thing. And for me, was a pivoting moment when I fell in love with this whole combination of strategy, creativity, communications, change management, all of the commercial aspects of that as well. Everything coming together through this concept called brand. And it was almost like falling in love for the first time, because that's what I decided that I wanted when I grew up. So we packed up, we left Australia, moved to England, and because I decided I had to do an MBA, I felt like having left law school and a very early law career to go into the military in Israel and then retire in Australia was a very disjointed type of story to tell, that people wouldn't hire me, but an MBA would help, and an MBA would bring some of those business credentials that I wanted to progress. So I did that, and I specialized in I focused my MBA on innovation and brand strategy, the things that I'm truly passionate about. And straight after that, I got a job with a WPP agency. Back then was called Brand Union. Nowadays, it's called Super Union, which is possibly the flagship brand consultancy from WPP. I joined as the worldwide strategist, working across the global business unit on their global clients. And my first project was actually to reposition HSBC globally. And I was in a project that was involving 11 of their growth markets. Was very interesting, fascinating. When I felt like I had learned enough about how to build the DNA of a business, which for me is the brand, I wanted to learn how to build audiences around that brand. And that took me to media. So if brand is at the very beginning of the marketing spectrum, media is possibly at the very end of it. And that's what took me to the global business unit of Procter & Gamble, where I was fully immersed in Planet Woman. And I say that because I was responsible for two categories, being beauty, so Max Factor was my brand, and feminine care, and the brand was Always. So I was having usual conversations with my wife about panty liners, tampons, mascaras, and whatnot. Fascinating and very scary period in my life. And I spent a couple of years in that business, and then I had with P&G, and then I had a headhunter approaching me with an opportunity for us to come back to Australia. At that point in time, we had already had two kids. Gabriella was first born in Australia. Sammy was born in England. And it felt like a good thing to do, coming back to where we had family, and was also a good opportunity for me to advance in my career. It's been now 6 years since we returned to Australia. I spent maybe half of the time working with a few different agencies, the one that has brought us here and a couple of others. I have also done my own consulting time. I've been running my own consultancy, a brand consultancy, as well as a digital agency specialized on TikTok. And it's been wonderful. It's been quite a ride. It's been a journey. Let's start with the worst. You never forget, people that have done wrong to you. And that came from actually my first boss at that first agency where I started. I've always loved writing. Writing has always been a passion of mine, and I felt like I needed to write, not only to show things off, but for me is a very good way to crystallize my knowledge. I learn a lot when I write. So I started writing about the work that I was doing and the things that I was learning during that time. And that boss came to me and said, well, English is not your first language, so you should probably try to write as little as you can, and this way make less mistakes. That was the worst possible advice. First of all, because it was very undermining. That was very much like a punch on my stomach. I probably was, maybe spent like 1 or maybe even 2 years without writing anything at all. And when it comes to learning, we all know that we learn from our mistakes. To err is only human, and that prevented me from being better. So don't accept any advice like this if anyone gives you something even similar to that. In terms of the best advice, I don't think if it's just about the job or careers, I think there is one about life I remember that applies to everything, and before I ran my first marathon, a very close friend said, whatever happens, don't give up. Your toes will be sore, you'll be all tired, and your muscles, your hair will be hurting, everything. Just don't give up. Find a way to finish, and cross the finishing line. And I mean, this is something so simple, but it was so powerful that I have never let it go. I have always kept it inside of me, because if you're giving up, you're not competing against those that are really competing against you. You're just losing with those that are already going to lose the battle. So never give up. Always pursue what you think is right for you. I never realized how transferable my skills can be. I mean, I've been in industries that are completely different, and looking back, I can see how those skills were transferred. But it always felt like I'm starting back from zero. I'm and I have to learn some things in a certain way, which wasn't bad at all, because it allowed me to learn new things. Otherwise, I was just retrofitting to the ways that I was already familiar with. But I think that having that awareness that your craft and your skills are there not only to serve your career, but to serve you, or not only to serve your employer, but to serve you, is something quite valuable. It's something that I wish I knew better before. I'm a very passionate person, and sometimes you want to do things that others are not ready to do so, and like a classic mistake is to come up with something great that you think is great, backing that with the whole business case behind it. But still, if you're not able to take people on the journey with you from beginning to end and make them feel part of that solution and not something that is only yours so they can execute or enjoy, it's a very important thing. I have probably missed on a few opportunities because I haven't done that. And that was a very good learning. Make sure that this is a shared solution, is a shared idea, as opposed to something coming from you to the other. I mean, I don't find myself, I don't think I am the successful person that others should be looking up, because my life is far from being balanced or anything like that. I've been living with insomnia for I don't know how many years now. But I think I'm not even sure if balance is a good thing for success as well. I tend to go 150% on everything, and if it's about burning the midnight oil to get that that document ready, I'm going to do that. But if it's also to turn some play time with my son into like some crazy adventure, I'm going to do that as well. So I haven't been a very balanced person, but I think that the ability and the eagerness to always be starting again has for sure been very advantageous for me, and being adaptable, being flexible. These three things, always starting again, never feeling like the glass is half full. There is always more that you can add to that. Is something that keeps my energy high.